Hi, everyone, and welcome to this presentation. It's titled AI and Graduate Writing Futures, Resisting Domestication, Negotiating Possibilities. This is a presentation for the Doctoral Seminar Series in the Faculty of Education at Memorial University. So one of the things we know in graduate studies, in graduate writing and in graduate studies generally, is that we're on the cusp of enormous transformation. Changes are coming fast, they're coming every day, and we are faced with new technological innovations at a speed that we've never faced before. Since ChatGPT emerged in November 2022, the AI architecture has expanded rapidly and is now being used by people all over the place, all over the world. AI, generative AI particularly, has the capacity to engage in intellectual tasks, to learn, to innovate, and to produce human-like text. These are proving to be highly successful products. And it's fair to say that these systems have the potential to disrupt higher education and writing as we know it, because not only do they assist with authorship, but they can potentially replace it. For scholars like myself, who have developed a career around helping students, master's and doctoral students, to write theses and dissertations, and helping people to publish in research contexts, these are extremely perplexing times. Proponents of generative AI suggest that systems like ChatGPT can produce every aspect of the research writing process, from developing the research, coming up with ideas, developing research questions, generating the paper, and revising. So what does this mean for us? What does it mean for graduate students? And this was essentially what I wanted to find out, is how to understand this new environment, but also how to advise my students. The rapid pace of change, even over the last 6 months or the last 3 months, as well as the barrage of products that we now see, platforms, add-ons, plugins, all of this has created a frenetic, overwhelming environment. And we seem to be faced with what Pignard and Stengers call infernal alternatives, where our choices are reduced to accept or reject, accept or be left behind. So we feel like we have to accept these changes we're faced with because we have no alternatives. And in essence, it's no choice at all. Accept or be left behind. And we feel like we have no choice in this process. Using generative AI seems inevitable, and any criticisms render us being labeled, anti-technology Luddites, anti-democratic, so to criticize this new technology means that we are somehow being negative in terms of progress. So this was my challenge, was how do I advise the graduate students I supervise or who attend my classes? And we're talking about research writing here, which is all about innovation, creativity, but also acknowledging that they are long, complicated pieces of discursive writing, which are often completed under extremely difficult pressures and time constraints. So what do thesis and dissertation writers need to know when they are making decisions about engaging with generative AI in their research projects, but particularly in their research writing? And one of the most puzzling things for me is that, for me, like many of you, writing is an epistemology. It's a way of processing the world, and it's a way of coming to know the world. So when I have a problem, I write my way through it. So consequently, everything in me wants to reject generative AI. But I can also see the benefits, especially for students who are judged on their language and on being different. So my purpose in this presentation was really to share with you how I've come to terms with this, So I think it's important to explore what's happening. But my purpose is really to find a way to help people make decisions. I can't make these decisions for you, but I want to have a say in how you make the decisions. And that's what I'm going to try and persuade you of in this presentation. So as I prepared for the presentation, one word kept surfacing, and I want to use this word as a way of thinking about, as a metaphor really, of how we can frame decision-making about engaging with generative AI. And I'm inspired by Sarah Ahmed here, whose method involves following words around in and out of their intellectual histories. So I'm only going to do this in a little way, but I want to try and do that. Okay. So before I begin, I did want to say that I do have family members. Both of my children, my sons, work in the tech startup fields. Both of them are software developers. My father was in the computer industry from the beginning of computers. So I have a predisposition for new technologies. And I am actually really amazed by the capabilities of generative AI. And I'm amazed at how it's able to produce sensible, thoughtful, well-structured, academic sounding texts. But at the same time, since November 2022, I've been in a tailspin. All my certainties about what I know about writing, especially graduate writing, have become unstable. I'm facing that infernal alternative of having to embrace generative AI, even though I don't want to. People keep saying to me, well, you have to prepare your students for a world with generative AI. Otherwise, they'll get left behind and you're doing them a disservice. So, with all these pressures, I began reskilling myself. And the very first step was to learn exactly what generative AI was, because I think, well, I didn't know for sure. So, although AI itself has been around since the 1950s, and as people keep telling me that in recent years we've all been using various formations of AI, we've been using predictive text, autobots, and other forms of AI. And although technology have always had transformative impacts on society, and as people keep telling me as well, like writing itself or the ballpoint, um, or the book. So it's fair to say that the impact of, so despite the fact that society has seen these impacts of technologies over time, and we've had AI in our systems for quite a while, it's fair to say that what's happening now is really unprecedented. Um, the impact of large language models and generative AI is unprecedented, and it's unprecedented in two key ways. The first one is generative AI's capability to generate writing, images, videos, summaries of readings, and much more, all of which can potentially replace human generated communication. And in the same way, it's being argued now that in the same way, human cultures moved from oral traditions to literate traditions. We are now in the process of moving into this post-literate culture. In this post-literate world, we curate writing through skilled prompt engineering and information management. So this is the first time we have a technology that is good enough to write for people. So the human author may no longer be necessary. And this is an incredible change to societies where writing is so highly valued. And generative AI challenges these values that we place on writing. The primacy of writing culturally is the reason why it forms the basis of all our education systems. So the implications for post-secondary education generally and writing specifically are enormous. The second reason why these changes are unprecedented is because of the rate of technological development. It's increased at a pace that we just haven't seen before. When ChatGPT was released, it logged over 1 million users in 5 days, and in 2 months reached 100 million monthly users. Generative AI moved quickly out of the hands of experts and became available and accessible to a wide range of people in a short period of time. And now the tech race is on. So we see ourselves in this rapidly emerging ecosystem of platforms and providers, of top-up products, services, fine-tuned models, and many of them are increasingly behind a paywall. When I began researching AI, adverts for AI apps on reading, writing, research, data analysis, and much, much more have taken over my phone and my social media. In scholarly journals, you see so often now many in the academic research community are excited about the possibilities because they argue that generative AI means that they can dispense with the chore of writing and they can focus on their core business of doing research. And all these products and enthusiasms see AI as a time saver, an efficiency tool, a mechanism to increase writing productivity. It can produce every aspect of the research project, from initial ideas, brainstorming, questions, writing the draft, revising, even peer reviewing a published paper. It can recommend methods. It can, really develop all aspects of the project. So it's fair to say that, whether you use the generative AI minimally or with all the available capabilities, it's creating a cultural disruption, particularly in post-secondary contexts and research writing contexts. And I think it's really important to acknowledge just how significant these changes are. There's no point in pretending that this is business as usual. And it's important to acknowledge how bewildering these things can be for us as well as our students. And of course, how promising with opportunities and possibilities. No, way behind here. Sorry, my slides are a little bit behind. These are all the things that were popping up on my on my feed. So, how to write a book with AI in 24 hours. Okay, so it didn't take me long into this journey to begin to realize that alongside the promises of generative AI, we are now seeing a huge body of literature that are beginning to unpack the biases, risks, and potential harms. And I mean, you probably already know this because these ideas are becoming more and more widespread, but a range of hazards are associated with AI generally. The possibility for deliberate misinformation, malicious use, leakage of data, privacy violations, and this is just glossing over it. Increasingly, we hear about the enormous energy costs and environmental harms, as well as the copyright infringements experienced by artists and writers, and that's something that I haven't discussed too much in here. More and more information is emerging around the bias because of the training data that the LLMs train on, which the basis of the data is racist, biased, and sexist. I mean, the tech companies who produce the LLMs are aware of this, so they have tried to minimize the bias. But they've been using people in extremely appalling labor conditions to tag and help clean the information. So there are all these problems, real problems that are associated with AI. So with the pace of change, the barrage of products, the risks and biases that come along with this, it's created this environment that can be extremely overwhelming and bewildering. How do we make sense of this? mean, this is what I was facing. And what I turned to was technology theory. So, theories of technology adoption tell us that when faced with new technologies, there are those who are open to innovation, the early adopters. And these people can see the opportunities and possibilities, and despite risks, will start using the technology almost immediately. There are also those people who view the new technologies with horror, convinced that it will lead to an apocalyptic future. And while I would normally consider myself as an early adopter of technology, I'm usually pretty open. With generative AI, I find myself in the latter camp. So it was really comforting then to find the middle ground of domestication theory in technology studies. And domestication theory describes how we begin to integrate new technologies into our lives. And according to this theory, when users are confronted with new technologies, these strange and wild technologies have to be house trained. They have to be integrated into the structures, daily routines, and values of users in their environments. Domestication is a process of transformation that goes on from seeing this artifact as radical, exciting, unfamiliar, and possibly even dangerous, to seeing it as routine, mundane, and an ordinary part of life. So, domestication theory describes how technology becomes integrated into life and how new technologies become less strange and more normal. As technologies become integral to our lives, we begin to see them less as technologies and more as habitual everyday activities. As Burke et al. Suggest, the process of domestication also implies, at a symbolic level, that in the long run, these technologies, like pets, can become part of the family. And part of their reasoning for this is that pets often don't behave well. So it's not just a one-way street. There is sometimes pushback from the pets. And the whole idea of generative AI as a pet is heartening. And this way of thinking about technology and domestication makes me feel much more in control. And I begin to feel that, okay, there's just an adjustment that we need to make and perhaps a process of value alignment. Um, so in technology studies, Sobercool and Hess identify 4 sequential phases to the domestication of technology. Appropriation, this is when we start accessing the technology. Objectification, and this is when we place value on it, so it becomes prominent in our lives. Incorporation, when it becomes part of what we do regularly. And then conversion, when the technology constructs users and shapes relationships. And then domestication takes place at different levels, cognitively, symbolically, when we integrate it into our sense making and cultural activities, and practically, where the technology begins to be indispensable. So at this point in the process of domestication, we stop thinking about the role and the impact of the technology because it's become so essential to our lives. And we take it for granted. So, like the ballpoint pen, for example. The message in this analysis of technology adoption is that we have accepted strange technologies into our lives before. We are in control, and we can decide how to use these technologies. Yet the idea of domestication is unsettling and troubling. And each time my phone or computer updates, a rash of new AI add-ons are embedded without options for me to refuse. My email is full of workshops on how to use AI to conduct research, to write, to publish, to assess, to create learning materials, and so much more. And it just seems to me that I'm the one in this relationship who's being house trained and tamed. I'm the pet. I'm jumping when I'm told to. So even the domestication process described by Sobercool and Hess seems to hint at our own domestication. When technology begins to construct and shape relationships, whose interests are being served. So let's explore domestication a little bit further, because the whole idea of domesticating a technology is appealing. Narratives of domestication are very strong and persistent in Western thought, because domestication implies growth, progress, stability, and cultivation. These are strong narratives that filter through our history books and in our popular culture and in our storytelling. The main domestication story is that humans gathered from, kind of nomadic, wild hunter-gathering to farming, which is organized and is an integral stepping stone in civilization. In Western modernist thought, domestication is tied to ideals of progress, cultivation, stability, productivity, and growth. It's a narrative that sets up a binary of the wild versus the civilized, where wildness is being contained and controlled for human good through the process of domestication. So narratives of domestication are appealing unless we are the domesticated. If we are the domesticated, then we are engaging in a totally different set of relationships. Then domestication means homogenization, subjugation, regulation, containment, and taming. The domesticated in history have not fared well. More damaging is the idea of domestication creating a natural order of things, with deeply ingrained, taken for granted assumptions about progress and the politics of human difference. Domestication narratives often normalize and justify these assumptions until we stop questioning them. If technology constructs and shapes users, how am I being shaped? If I integrate these technologies into my sense making, what am I implicitly incorporating? This is what I want my graduate students to ask. We become domesticated by AI when we accept unquestioningly the ontologies, the worldviews, the norms, the values, and relationships imposed on us. We become domesticated when we see generative AI as a mere tool for our use, instead of a technology with agency that can construct and shape our behavior. To begin questioning assumptions underlying generative AI, I want to highlight three key concerns, and these are definitely not the only concerns, but they are three key concerns relevant for graduate research writers. And this has to do with the nature of the data that we're dealing with, the type of knowledge being promoted, and the dominant research paradigm. So the very first concern for me is that AI, whether open access or not, is a commercial venture. It's based on the interests of commerce and making money for some. Since many of these products are accessible and available to all, the commercial aspect seems to sink below visibility. However, increasingly, the best products, the high quality ones, will move behind a paywall. It's in the interests of the tech companies who are making money to have us buy AI and their products. And this is part of the reason why there's always the infernal alternative. Accessible AI is not an altruistic good, nor in the interests of the well-being of society. We are being maneuvered to accept AI or get left behind because there are people who stand to gain. These infernal alternatives, where we see ourselves as having little choice, are a common discursive feature of capitalism as a way of ensuring acceptance of unwelcome conditions. It's important to remember that the current frenzy around producing AI add-ons and plugins is about commercial gain and advantage. So the app that can write the research paper for you is not about you or your research, it's about somebody else's bottom line. In addition, we're moving into a new phase of capitalism, people are now arguing, called surveillance capitalism. And under surveillance capitalism, our data is the product. All the billions of searches and posts we make every day are fuel for AI. Anytime we search, anytime we buy something, our products are being viewed for how long. And surveillance capitalism is about collecting data on individual consumer behaviors and then using that data to shape your behavior. Our data is then used to predict and manipulate consumer desires and behaviors in individualized marketing. We have become the product. We're the product and the consumer. And our data is then sold to those who have other products to sell back to us. When that advertisement for the AI research helper pops up on your screen, it's an attempt to manipulate your specific consumption desires. As a research writer, resisting domestication means critically engaging with these market-driven imperatives. So critically understanding what's happening here and what this is, and making decisions about how you want to engage with that and how this would affect your research writing goals. So not just unquestioningly accepting it. A second concern revolves around the implication of bias that exists in the data. So we know biases exist, but we may not think about the implications of this bias. A key characteristic of generative AI is the homogenizing aspect of the outputs and the increasing absence of difference. The large language models scrape the available data in multiple complex layers, and they take examples and predict an answer to a user's question. So we know that bias is embedded in language. We knew that before AI. So it's no surprise that these LLMs, these large language models, reproduce the bias. So we know that there's an overrepresentation of men, whites, Western ways of thinking, and of course, English. And standard English grammar, the ones that the LLMs use, is a bias against any kind of accent or difference in style. All of this promotes a monoculture where specific norms are presented in language as universal. These norms exclude anyone who is different and can subtly and effectively silence or ignore those who fall outside those categories. And I mean, these biases create not only cross-sectional, cross-sectional biases in terms of, sexism, racism, those kinds of things, but they also create temporal problems because the data is tied to time. Anyway, we won't go into that now. The risk about the bias in language is particularly important because it creates a sanitization of difference. So the data in the LLMs promote a monoculture that will exclude many of us. So resisting domestication means critically examining this push towards a monoculture. It means interrogating the norms and biases embedded in the data, as well as the silences and the absences. A third concern is that the AI architecture is based on a particular perspective of knowledge and research, and that's generalized predictions. These LLMs have no understanding of what they generate. They have no moral compass. They are not a search engine. They're not an information source, and they can't answer a question. What they do is like a rake. They scrape the data that in their training data and according to how they've been trained, and they produce a response to a question. They generate language, but they don't think. They look back at what we have produced in the past and predict what we want for the future. And they do this in quite sophisticated ways, but they can't recognize true and false, and they can only produce statistical relationships about predictions. And this is why you get hallucinations or regurgitation of incorrect information, Because if an answer to a question is unusual, it will provide you with the usual answer. So what I mean is, for example, if the answer is Keetmanshoop, a town in Namibia, the language learning model will change that to America, because America is the more usual answer. And it's basing that result on previous patterns. So basically what it's saying, Keetmanshoop can't be the right answer because that's too different. We'll replace it with America because that's more normal. So these hallucinations are not an error in the feature. They are a feature of the whole product. Okay, so what this means is that difference and diversity are rendered invisible, all fodder for this monoculture. And it's important to be aware that AI's architecture is based on a particular worldview of knowledge and research. And that worldview is that knowledge comes through predictions by algorithms and statistical modeling, that this is the primary way of understanding the world. And there are many other ways of understanding the world. Qualitative, situated, contextual research is one way. Arts-based knowing, where we use other senses, is another way. The many indigenous ontologies, I mean, to mention just a few. And as somebody mentioned to me yesterday, if you take indigenous ontologies, then there's a focus on the we rather than on the I, which these models promote. So predictive research is just one way. And while it can be useful, it can also be highly problematic since it depends on the quality of the data. And it promotes this universal view without consideration of the contextual circumstances. And, before AI, predictive research was highly criticized because it depends on the quality of the data and the predictions often don't match the world. So resisting domestication means consciously deciding what you value in terms of a research perspective and what you value as knowledge, and not unthinkingly adopting a worldview because it's readily available and accessible and will save you time. In the process of technology adoption or our domestication, with this pace of change, the barrage of new products, the frenzy to keep up, these deeper issues often drop from sight, as do, because the pressure is on, as does the decision making that we can engage in. We do have choices beyond accept or be left behind. There are many different scenarios to our own narratives of how we would resist or how we would engage. We can create our own stories of entanglement and disentanglement. We might choose some products over others because we have critically assessed them. So it's important to make deliberate decisions because our writing and our research products always matter. And whether we or AI writes, these have effects and effects, consequences that flow both ways for us as well as what we produce. So what I'm arguing for here is that these are not just technological adjustments that we have to get used to. If we are conducting research and using generative AI, these are ontological and epistemological choices and decisions we need to make. Okay, so I have three important inspirations to offer. Well, they're not important, but I have three inspirations to offer as a way of moving forward. And I want to draw on the wisdom of Audre Lorde, a writer-poet who lived from 1934 to 1992. And I'm drawing on Audre Lorde deliberately because here was someone who wrote in a specific time and place, who had such an enormous impact and continues to have an impact. So she was a person who recognized the power of difference, who wrote against the grain, and whose writing has always had an enormous impact on many people around the world in different contexts. The first inspiration is to celebrate difference, both yours and others. In Audre Lorde's words, it is within our differences that we are both most powerful and most vulnerable. And some of the most difficult tasks of our lives are claiming the differences and learning to use those differences for bridges rather than barriers between us. One activity I ask my students to complete in my graduate research writing class is to sit in their seat, look around the classroom, and find 3 things that only they can see or only they would notice. The classroom is an ordinary one like you've seen many times before. And these are the only instructions I give them. Look for 3 things that only you would see. Initially, they think the exercise is silly because they think everyone sees the way they see. I give them a few minutes, they begin writing, then they read out their writing to the class. And they are always surprised at how unique and individual their responses are. Some notice the color changes even in the white walls or the spaces where the shadows are deeper. Others focus on the floor and the material of the floor or count the ceiling tiles. Others pay attention to the people in the room, noticing little personal details. Some take the big picture view and see a metaphor in the classroom situation. They begin to see through this activity that we each have a unique view of the world. Of course, we are shaped by the discourses around us, the world views that influence us, our own histories, our environments, but our interests and passions also shape what we see. It is this unique take on the world that makes research interesting. Our beliefs about what is important, are valuable, and success research agendas and publishing careers are often tied to these individual values and curiosities. The more a researcher believes in the topic, the more compelling the writing, and the more the reader is captured. If I asked ChatGPT to look around the classroom, it would assess statistically the most probable answer based on the loudest people on the internet and generate the most likely response given the data. Generative AI is not going to take that curiosity, that silence, the invisibility, the injustice you experience in your life and turn it into a worthwhile project that may have a huge impact on society. Only you can do that. The second inspiration is to develop an awareness of who you are as a researcher writer, which builds on this uniqueness. Again, Audre Lorde aptly conveys this by saying, I cannot separate my life and my poetry. I write my living, I live my work. I am a Black woman, poet, lesbian, mother, teacher, friend, warrior. If I do not bring all of who I am to whatever I do, then I bring nothing of lasting worth, because I have withheld some piece of the essential. If I do not bring all of who I am to you here, speaking of what I feel, of what I know, then I do you all an injustice. Develop researcher writer identities that will enable you to have agency and choices. This means understanding and articulating how you see the world, your ontologies, how you want to understand the world, your epistemologies, and what you value, your axiology. Write your way into this. This is what I give my students to write. And you may need to write about these questions several times before you achieve some clarity. And maybe your responses change over time. But make deliberate decisions about the researcher, scholar, writer you want to be. In the process, examine your own assumptions. Begin to see what frames your own seeing. When you engage in a research project, conceptualize it carefully. Think deeply about your ontology, epistemology, and methodology, and how these are linked to your research questions, and ultimately what you hope to achieve through your research. The third inspiration is to pay attention to the passion and the poetics. And I don't mean poetry here, I mean pay attention to your writing. Research curiosities and agendas are developed through our unique researcher identities, our histories, and our possible futures. Being passionate also means being vulnerable. And once again, Lorde wonderfully expresses why it's important. I have come to believe over and over again that what is most important to me must be spoken, made verbal and shared, even at the risk of having it bruised or misunderstood. What are you passionate about? What must be spoken? As for poetics, how we write is as important as what we write. It's an epistemological choice. How we choose to write our research makes a difference, not only to ourselves and our readers, but to the people we write about. As Lord writes, poetry is not a luxury, not for anyone. For the quality of light by which we scrutinize our lives has direct bearing upon the product which we live and upon the changes we hope to bring about through those lives. It is through the poetics of writing that we can make things happen. Lord saw herself as a warrior poet, someone who could change the world with her words and her writing. This is what I want my students to hear, and this is what I hope for you. Thank you very much, everyone. I hope you found something of use in this.